Standing tall amid the marshes and maritime grasses of the Outer Banks, Bodie Island Lighthouse is at once a practical tool of navigation and a monument to the changing relationships between people and the sea. Its black and white bands cut a dramatic silhouette against the coastal sky. Its lantern once made invisible shoals and shifting currents legible to mariners at night. But the lighthouse is more than stone, brick and lens. Over a century and a half, it has been a home to keepers and families, a witness to shipwrecks and storms, and a stage for the tales people tell to make sense of loss and danger. Those stories in turn have created a folklore, whispers of knocks in boarded fireplaces, the feeling of being watched on the tower stairs, legends that place the restless dead of the sea near the lantern room. This essay explores the layered life of Bodie Island Lighthouse, its construction and function, the human stories that intersect with its light, the tragedies that have marked its history, and the haunting tales that grew from both fact and imagination. To understand Bodie Island Lighthouse, you must first picture the landscape. The Outer Banks are a chain of barrier islands stretching off the North Carolina coast, a narrow, largely flat geography of sand, dunes, salt marshes, and channels. These islands are restless. They migrate, erode, and rebuild under the influence of wind and waves. For centuries, mariners have found these shores treacherous. The combination of shoals, currents, and frequent fog made the coastline a graveyard of ships and called for reliable aids to navigation. Bodie Island itself is less an island than a broad spit of barrier terrain, defined by the ebb and flow of inlets that have opened and closed over decades. Its marshland, tidal creeks, and dune lines formed a fragile and dynamic stage for human activity. The site chosen for the lighthouse lies inland from the immediate ocean edge, anchored in a belt of maritime forest and low-slung coastal meadow. This location was a practical compromise, close enough to the channel and shoals to mark danger to passing vessels, yet far enough inland to offer some protection from the direct pounding of Atlantic storms. The history of a lighthouse at Bodie Island is a story of repeated reinvention. The site hosted multiple towers as engineers learned more about the coastal soil and as the needs of navigation evolved. The first Bodie Island light was authorized in the early 19th century and followed patterns common to early coastal lights: modest masonry or brick towers, oil-fueled lamps, and limited reach. These early structures were often ill-suited to the shifting sands and marshy foundations of the Outer Banks. Storms and shoreline changes could undermine foundations and drive salt water into places masonry was not meant to survive. A second tower, built mid-century, attempted improvements in durability and in the power of its lens. In the late 1850s and into 1859, the station was rebuilt with an eye toward a more permanent structure and better optics, including a Fresnel lens that could project light much farther than older lamps. That tower stood until the turbulence of the Civil War and the era's military actions affected coastal aids. The third and current lighthouse, the one visitors see today with its bold black and white horizontal bands, was completed and first exhibited its first order Fresnel light on October 1st, 1872. This 150-foot-plus tower and the accompanying keepers' dwellings were constructed to be more resilient than earlier structures, incorporating lessons learned from previous failures and reflecting the increasing importance of reliable coastal lights to an expanding nation of commerce and sea traffic. The 1872 light not only marked the channel, but also symbolized a reconstruction of coastal infrastructure after a decade of national conflict. The wind carried a warning long before the storm arrived. On the evening of October 12, 1881, Keeper Elijah Merrick stood on the gallery of the Bodie Island Lighthouse, squinting toward the horizon. The sky had soured into a bruised purple, and the sea below churned restlessly against the shoals. Even from his lofty perch, Elijah could taste salt on the air as the first heavy gusts rattled the iron railing beneath his hands. Behind him, the great Fresnel lens glowed steady, its light sweeping across the restless Atlantic. Each revolution was precise, methodical, a promise to every sailor that the shoals had not gone unseen. But Elijah knew the truth. The graveyard of the Atlantic swallowed ships regardless of warning. The shoals were cruel and shifting, and storms like this made them invisible, a hidden snare beneath black water. His assistant, a young man named Jonah Pierce, emerged from the lantern room, his face pale. "Storm's coming fast, keeper." "Faster than I've seen in years." Elijah's jaw tightened. "Then we'll keep her burning bright. God help any ship that's caught in this." And already, as if in answer, a shape appeared on the horizon. The vessel lurched against the waves, its sails torn, its masts bending like reeds. A schooner, no more than 100 feet long, fought desperately against the fury of the Atlantic. Through his spyglass, Elijah saw men clinging to the rigging, their faces white against the dark sky. One waved frantically, though the gesture was pitiful in its hopelessness. "She'll never make it," Jonah whispered. Elijah lowered the glass, his voice heavy. "No, she won't." The storm hit full force. The schooner was driven closer and closer to the shoals, the sea rising in mountains that crashed down upon her deck. Lightning split the sky, illuminating the vessel's agony. Splintering timbers, men clinging like barnacles, sails whipped into rags. The two keepers stood helpless as the ship fought her last battle. With a final shudder, the schooner struck the bar. The sound carried even through the roar of the wind, a sickening crack of wood splitting open. Screams followed, faint and fleeting, lost almost instantly to the storm. Then the sea took her. By dawn, the world was unrecognizable. The beach below Bodie Island was littered with wreckage, barrels, planks, and shattered beams strewn like bones across the sand. Elijah and Jonah descended to the shore, their boots sinking deep into wet sand. The gulls had arrived first, wheeling and crying above the carnage. Among the wreckage lay the bodies of sailors, their faces still twisted in terror. "Dear God," Jonah breathed, pressing a hand to his mouth. Elijah knelt beside one of the dead, closing the man's staring eyes. "Gather what you can. We'll bury them before nightfall." The two men worked for hours, hauling bodies from the tide's reach. Some were barely men at all, boys no older than Jonah. They dug graves beyond the dunes, marking them with driftwood crosses scavenged from the wreck. The sand was wet and heavy, and with each body they lowered, Elijah felt the weight of the sea pressing down on him. As the sun sank low, they carried the last of the dead, a bearded man with a sailor's tattoos, to his grave. Jonah paused, his eyes haunted. "Do you reckon their souls found peace?" Elijah stared at the endless horizon, where the waves still rolled and foamed. "I reckon the sea doesn't let go so easily." That night, as wind rattled the keeper's quarters, Elijah woke to a sound he could not explain. It was faint, muffled, but unmistakable, knocking. It came from the base of the lighthouse, heavy, desperate blows against the iron door. He rose from his bed, heart thundering, and lit a lantern. Jonah stirred in the next room, muttering in his sleep, oblivious. Elijah descended the stairs, each step creaking beneath his weight. The knocking grew louder, frantic, as though fists were hammering to be let inside. When he reached the bottom, he pulled the bolt and threw open the door. Only the night greeted him. The dunes stretched silent and empty. The sea hissed against the sand. Elijah stepped into the cold, lantern raised. No footprints, no intruders, only the endless roar of the Atlantic. He closed the door, but the sound haunted him still, echoing long after it ceased. In the weeks that followed, the keepers endured more than storms. Jonah was the first to hear the voices. While trimming the lamp one fog-heavy night, he froze. From the gallery outside came a chorus of cries, low, ragged, pleading. He rushed to the door and flung it open, expecting stranded sailors. But the gallery was empty, the fog pressing close, damp and suffocating. The cries faded into silence, leaving only the sweep of the light across the dark sea. Another night, Elijah climbed the spiral stairs to inspect the lantern. Halfway up, his lantern flickered. Ahead of him, he saw 3 men ascending, dripping wet, their oilskins dark with seawater. He called out, but they gave no answer. Slowly, they turned their faces toward him. Hollow eyes, pale skin, mouths half open as if gasping for breath. The lantern slipped from Elijah's hand, shattering on the iron steps. When he raised his gaze again, the stairwell was empty. Word spread among locals that the wreck had cursed the lighthouse. Fishermen refused to cast their nets near the shoals after sundown. Beachcombers whispered of pale figures staggering in the surf, only to vanish when approached. One woman swore she saw a sailor crawl across the beach, leaving a trail of wet sand behind him before dissolving into foam. Another claimed she heard the sound of church bells on stormy nights, bells tolling from a ship long lost. The keepers endured in silence, their duty binding them to the tower. But both men knew the truth. The tragedy had not ended with the storm. The sea was still claiming its due. Years later, after Jonah had left the service, Elijah remained. In his final journal, a page was found written in a trembling hand. They come each night when the storm is strong. I hear their fists upon the door, their boots upon the stairs. Sometimes I smell the salt before I see them. They climb toward the lantern, dripping and hollow-eyed, and I cannot stop them. I believe they are bound here, as I am. The light was not enough to save them, and so they return, forever seeking what they lost. If any soul reads this after me, know this: the sea remembers, and it does not forgive. Not long after, Elijah disappeared. No body was ever found. Some say he walked into the surf and joined the men he could not save. The wind never truly rests along the Outer Banks. At night, when the Atlantic crashes hard against the shore, the Bodie Island Lighthouse rises like a shadow in the moonlight, its black and white stripes stark against the rolling clouds. Locals say the tower has a memory. Some even whisper that it holds onto the souls of those who never left the sea. Long ago, one keeper was known for his devotion to the light. He kept the lamp trimmed, the glass polished, the flame steady through storm and silence alike. But the sea is greedy. One bitter winter night, he vanished. No storm claimed him, no illness was recorded. He was simply gone. And yet, visitors have reported the faint sound of boots on the iron spiral stairs, slow and methodical. The lantern room door sometimes creaks open, though it is locked tight. Tour guides have felt a cold brush at their shoulders, as if someone leans close to inspect their work. Some claim that when the light cuts across the water at night, a shadowed figure lingers just beneath it, keeping his eternal watch. There are nights when the sea hurls its anger too close to shore. A wreck once scattered timber and bodies across the sandbars near Bodie Island. Men crying for help that never came. Fishermen say that when the fog is thickest, voices rise from the surf, hoarse, desperate, carried inland on the mist. One man walking the beach at twilight swore he saw hands breaking the surface of the water, clawing upward, only to vanish when he ran to help. Others say they've seen wet, staggering figures crawling from the surf, their eyes blank, their bodies limp, before dissolving back into foam. A tale told in hushed tones is that of the weeping child. Some say a family of a keeper once lost a young one to fever within the keeper's quarters. At night, when the light is extinguished and the grounds fall silent, visitors sometimes hear a child's sobs echoing across the marsh. The sound does not come from the tower, nor from the quarters. but drifts, soft and thin, on the salt wind. One ranger, locking up after dark, felt a small hand slip into his. He looked down to find no one there, only the hollow hush of the marsh grass swaying in the moonlight. When storms roll in from the sea, the lighthouse seems to come alive. Some have claimed to see an extra light burning within the lantern room. Even when the Fresnel lens is dark and dormant, it flickers like an old oil lamp, glowing faintly before vanishing. Old-timers call it the keeper's flame, lit by those who still tend the light, though their bodies have long since gone to earth or sea. Even now, as the Bodie Island Lighthouse stands proud against the North Carolina coast, it is never truly silent. The wind carries footsteps, the sea whispers with lost voices, and the tower itself seems to sigh with memory. Those who walk its spiral stairs or linger on the dunes after dark leave with a certainty. Bodie Island Lighthouse is not just a guide for ships, it is a keeper of souls. To this day, visitors to Bodie Island Lighthouse tell uneasy tales. They hear knocking on the iron door when no one stands outside. They feel damp air rush past them on the spiral stairs, though the night is dry. Some even swear they glimpse dripping figures in the lantern room, staring out at the sea with hollow eyes. And when storms rage across the Atlantic, distant lights flicker on the horizon, lanterns swaying from the rigging of a doomed schooner, eternally lost to the graveyard of the Atlantic. The light may guide ships still, but Bodie Island Lighthouse has become more than a beacon. It is a tombstone written against the sky, a keeper of tragedy by the sea,